here in a rather empty business class lounge here in Dubai, flying with Emirates from Auckland to London. But there's a good selection of red wines to look at, so I might have a look at the 2006 Chateau Angelus. Hello there. Today I've been travelling on a flight from New Zealand to Dubai, and I'm travelling on this afternoon to the UK with Emirates. I'm currently here in the business class lounge, and considering that what would have been a 17.5-hour flight became a 20.5-hour flight due to some weather problems in Auckland, meaning that we left late, I thought I'd take a look at the wine selection that they had here. And I was really pleased to see a bottle of a top Saint Emilion, Chateau Angelus. This is the 2006 vintage of this. So Angelus is known as one of the top wines of the Saint Emilion region, but in 2006 still classified as a Saint Emilion 1er Grand Cru Classe B. The estate lies to the west of Saint Emilion on some fork slopes that face south, and so the soil types you have vary slightly. The top of the hillside tends to have more limestone and clay, and then towards the bottom you get a combination of clay, sand and limestone. The vineyards slope due south, and they're planted to about 50% of Merlot, 47% of Cabernet Franc, and a tiny proportion of Cabernet Sauvignon making up the balance of that. The estate, originally much smaller, has been owned by the de Bouard La Forest family since 1920. Between 1955 and 1996, it was classified as a Grand Cru Classe, and by 1985, the estate comprised 20 hectares in all. It was at that stage that the colourful character who is Hubert de Bouard de La Forest took over the estate. The estate's fortunes have taken various directions in the period since he took over. Hubert de Bouard de la Forest is certainly one of the top wine consultants in the Saint Emilion area. So as well as being a director of Chateau Angelus, he also advises on the winemaking of many other chateaux in the locale. Under his guidance, Angelus was promoted to the status of Premier Grand Cru Classe Class B in 1996, a status that it maintained until 2012, when in a controversial reclassification, Chateau Angelus was one of the estates upgraded to Premier Grand Cru Classe Class A, a status that had previously only been held by Cheval Blanc and Ozone. Controversy over de Bouard's involvement in the classification reached the court, and this ended up with Chateau Angelus withdrawing classification in 2022. In fact, Hubert de Bouard handed over the control of the estate to his daughter Stephanie in 2016, although he is still a director of the company. I think it's fair to say, whatever your opinion about his involvement in the 2012 classification, Chateau Angelus, no longer a Saint Emilion Premier Grand Cru Classe, is still recognised by most connoisseurs as one of the top wines from the Saint Emilion appellation. And personally, I think it's a wine which really best displays the characteristics of the limestone terroir that you find in this part of Saint Emilion. The estate is now 39 hectares in total, and I should also mention the name Angelus originally came from the bell tower of the local church, chiming out at mass times. Now, however, the chateau has its own bell tower, and if you happen to be there on the hour, the chimes will ring out. Just to talk about 2006, there was quite an early start to the season. Bud break and flowering went smoothly under really good conditions. But then there was a cool spell in August and early September that really slowed down ripening. There weren't any particular problems with humidity and disease, so the fruit was all picked in good condition, but the style of the vintage gives the wine good freshness. Harvest here took place between the 19th and the 29th of September. The final blend of the wine was 62% Merlot, with the balance remaining 38% being Cabernet Franc. Vinification for the Merlot took place in a mixture of stainless steel and oak tanks, while for the Cabernet Franc, concrete fermenters were used instead. The different parcels of the wine aged for between 20 to 22 months in oak, with the Merlot aging in new, medium toast French oak barriques. Some of the Cabernet Franc also aged in barriques, but another portion was aged in larger foudres. I have a note that suggests the wine should be drinking nicely now and should carry on doing so out until 2035. So let's take a look at it, shall we? First thing I'd say is there's a lovely depth of colour. That is opaque, I can't see through it. The rim has a ruby red edge or meniscus, but it loses very little colour to the rim. Certainly it's much more reddish, it's not a purple rim. I'm swirling it there. I believe the wine is labelled as 14% alcohol, and it is forming some quite noticeable tears there quite readily. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? Initially, there's a sort of quite a drying, earthy, cedary note, makes me think of lead pencil sharpening, so it's cedar and graphite perhaps. But then coming up behind that is quite a rich, ripe, lively, almost stewed red plum note. The palate is rich and structured. There are some very firm tannins, and left to their own accord, they would dry my mouth out very quickly. But there's also a wonderful fruit richness. There's almost a fruitcake note. The red fruit aromas that were cooked plum on the nose now become rich, bursting, red to black plum, perhaps with some prune notes, and hints of raisin, in combination with some cedary spice, cinnamon, nutmeg, almost gingery touches that are coming through from the toasty oak. This really almost has the spices, something like a hot cross bun or Christmas pudding, that combination of spice, powerful ripe fruit. The entire wine is quite heady, the alcohol's rich, but the wine is full-bodied enough that the ripe fruit is stopping the alcohol from giving a burning sensation. There's an underlying freshness that's keeping the sort of red and black plum notes of the fruit really quite lively. I suppose by the finish it's almost giving a red to black cherry sort of freshness. And despite the fact there's really good gripping tannins, they're not drying out the mid-palate, and the wine finishes with the juicy fruit that's there. Looking at the Wine Searcher aggregated critics score, this is getting a 93 out of 100. And I think this is a wine whose richness and opulence drives that score. It's undeniably got an intensity, a power, and yet there is balance and grace as well. This is not the most classical or structured wine that you'll come across. Aging-wise, although I'm confident that it would last out to 2035, because it doesn't have the tightness and the density for longer aging than that. Other than the fact I wouldn't age this for another 20 years. I'm not going to find too many faults in the wine. It has an opulence and approachability, and its level of maturity at the moment means it's beautifully balanced. It's just past its initial primary fruit stage, but it's not starting to dry out yet. It's a very enjoyable wine, and certainly very nice to treat myself with while I'm waiting here in Dubai for another plane. So thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. I will of course leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can find out where it's available near you and at what price. If you've enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd press the like button. If you have friends you think might like to see the video, do please feel free to pass it on to them. That would also be great. If you have any comments, please pop those in the comments box below. I'd love to know what you think about the wines of Saint Emilion, the wines of Angelus, the classification of 2012, or anything else relating to this wine or the tasting videos I'm doing. So thank you once again for joining me, and I do hope you'll manage to make some time in the near future and come and join me for another video tasting. Until then, bye for now.